You're at the early stage of your company and you're thinking about raising funds. Now, there are a lot of ways that you can go about fundraising, but it can be a lot to wrap your head around. You might have heard the word safe or convertible note get thrown around, but you're still fuzzy on how they actually work. So in this edition of No Fear Equity, we're going to take you through every detail you need to know about raising convertible notes and safes so that you can make sure you know exactly what you're getting into when you start talking to investors. Let's get into it. Now, most people when raising funds think about it in really basic terms. An investor gives you money, and in exchange, you give that investor equity, aka a percentage of the business or shares of the company. Each one of these shares is worth a certain amount of money, i.e. if the investor gives you $100 in exchange for 100 shares, then each share is worth $1. Because there's a price on each share, this method of raising funds is called a priced round. But at the early stage, it's actually pretty common to raise funds through a different method called a convertible instrument. Now, what this means is that an investor gives you money today, and in exchange, you promise to set aside some shares that you will give them in the future when you do your next round of financing. Now, if you're not familiar with this stuff, I know what you're probably thinking. Why would I do this? And there are a couple of reasons. The first one's pretty simple. Raising money through a priced round requires a lot of negotiation. It can take 3, 6 months, even a year just to close the deal. But you're a startup. You don't have 6 months of runway, and you definitely don't have all kinds of money to be spending on lawyers throughout this negotiation, which is why raising funds on a convertible instrument is usually a pretty sensible alternative. The deal's a lot simpler and it moves a lot faster, allowing you to put that money in the bank today and get moving as soon as possible. The second reason why early stage companies tend to raise on convertible instruments is because when you give someone shares of your company, you also give that person decision-making power. And in the early days of your business, it's better for you to maintain as much control as possible so that you can laser focus on getting your company off the ground without having too many cooks in the kitchen. Now, obviously, right up front, convertible instruments sound like the way to go, right? But what's the catch? Well, the downside for you as the founder is that when you raise on a convertible instrument, you're usually promising the investor pretty favorable terms in the future once you actually give them their shares. In the next lesson, we'll dive deep into all those specifics, including how different types of convertibles work so that you know exactly what you're giving up if you choose to raise money in this way. All right, so it's time for the big question. What are the types of convertible instruments that you can use to raise money? And if you clicked on the title of this video, you probably already know the two big ones are called safes and convertible notes. Now, obviously, there are some key differences between the two, but high level, it's important to just remember both of them are different types of the same thing, a convertible instrument, meaning the investor gives you money today in exchange for a promise that you'll give them shares in the future. Let's run through some of the key differences between safes and convertible notes so that you can choose which one's right for your fundraise. The biggest difference between safes and convertible notes is one word: debt. A convertible note is literally debt. Think about it like taking a standard loan out from the bank that you're going to pay back with interest, just like a normal loan, except the way you pay it back is with shares of your company instead of money. Here's an example. You're raising your first round, let's call it the seed round. Your investor's a nice guy, his name is Steve. Steve is giving you $100, but he's giving you this money in the form of a convertible note, meaning you don't have to give him any shares of your company yet. Every day that you don't pay Steve back, you'll accrue a little bit of interest on top of that $100. And by the time you raise your next round, let's say a year from now, you'll have to give Steve $115 worth of shares because your yearly interest rate was 15%. This is the hallmark of a convertible note. Just like a normal loan, it typically comes with an interest rate and a maturity date. A safe, on the other hand, is not debt, meaning there's no interest rate and no maturity date. Steve just gives you $100 and you convert that $100 whenever you raise your next round. Now, obviously no interest sounds good, right? So this is probably the way to go, but naturally there are pros and cons. Namely, with a convertible note, you'll typically set a clear number, let's say $5 million. And only once you've raised $5 million do you actually have to convert Steve's investment into shares. You can raise 10 rounds between now and then, but as long as you're still under 5 million total, you don't have to give away any shares yet. With a safe, on the other hand, you tend to have less flexibility. In a typical safe, you have to convert Steve's investment into shares right away when the next financing round happens, no matter how much money you've raised or how long it took. Sometimes this can be a disadvantage because, you do need to raise a little more money, but you're also not in the position to start giving Steve shares yet. Okay, so obviously there's a lot to get into here. In the next lesson, we'll take you step by step through each of the key terms you need to know in order to understand how safes and convertible notes work. Thanks for watching No Fear Equity. We hope you found it helpful, and we'll see you on the next one.